The breastplate of righteousness. The Roman soldier wore a molten metal chest covering that extended from the neck down nearly to the thighs, covering the entire torso. The breastplate covered the vitals, the heart, the lungs, and the viscera, which are the bowels. Now this is an important recognition. Many ancient cultures centered the soul and or heart in the viscera, literally in the bowels. When truth had dropped the distance from the head to the heart, it was owned. In Jewish culture, the visceral elements, particularly the bowels, were considered the seat of emotions and feelings. It was the seat of the affections and the center of the conscience, the desires, and the will. It's where life made up its mind. It is perhaps not unlike our own reference to gut feelings, those strong mental emotional convictions that govern our actions and behaviors. Sometimes we say, I just have to go with my gut on this one. This is, of course, can be good or bad, healthy or unhealthy, but the point here is that the breastplate of righteousness is intended to protect your visceral, soulish, and emotional makeup. In this way, your personal behaviors can be appropriately righteous, and you don't have to fall victim to emotional wounds. It is at this visceral, emotionally needy level that we are often deeply wounded. So many times we Christian soldiers fall right here. To my mind right now comes the names and faces of many people in our own church who have, under the weight of emotional stress, made incredibly poor choices. This is so real. It's so personal. I'm tempted to write here a long list of actual names and addresses, together with full descriptions of the pain, wounds, and destructions of sin. If I did, it would break your heart, and it breaks mine. Satan's schemes appear to be so good and need meeting, but they burn the soul with a painful fury. And these poor people have to live with the consequences of their choices for the rest of their lives, and not just them, but the people around them. I know men who have borne significant emotional weight, only to eventually collapse and let their emotions seize the steering wheel. They run to another woman, somehow convincing themselves it is manly and virile. No, on the contrary, to cave in to one's emotional appetites is nothing less than rank emotional weakness, and it is the source of 1,000 addictions. To protect your mental emotional vitals, you need to keep the breastplate of practiced righteousness polished to an incredibly high sheen. Why is this a breastplate of righteousness? In Scripture, the term righteousness can refer to a variety of things. 1. Your own self-righteousness. 2. The imputed righteousness of Christ. Or 3. The believer's practical behavioral acts of righteousness. The Christian soldier, based on his faith in positional righteousness, is then to have righteously put on or practice righteousness on a daily basis. That is moral righteousness. So when we talk about the breastplate of righteousness, let's add a word for clarity. The breastplate of practiced righteousness, which covers the vitals. The vitals are your viscera, the seat of affections, emotions, and conscience. That's where your appetites and your will meet, in your gut. Will you allow your desires to rule you, or will you rule your desires by act of will? The answer rests in your quotient of practiced righteousness, your breastplate. If left unprotected, you will fall to deep emotional appetites. If you have not properly maintained your breastplate of practiced righteousness, the flaming arrows of appetite will penetrate, and you will become one more Christian on the growing casualty list. How many intelligent, thinking Christians have fallen to their deep-seated personal needs of the heart because they left their vitals unprotected? Recently, I was forced to announce the names of 4 members of our church who have become casualties. These were not bad people. To the contrary, these were stalwarts. 3 or 4 of them had formal ministry training and had actually served on church staffs in the past. And the 4th was one of the female pillars of the church. Each was at one time an extraordinary example of committed Christian soldiering. They are also human beings, with normal human needs and desires. After years of battling well, in a season of unguarded selfishness, they left their breastplates of practiced righteousness untended and fell to the darkness of the spiritual war. We pursued them following the Matthew 18 process of church discipline. There has been no apparent effect thus far. 3 of the 4 have moved out of the state and taken up with new lovers. and the mates of their youth, to whom they gave their lifelong vows, are left behind, aching. Their children are devastated and their families are destroyed, all because their breastplate of practiced righteousness were allowed to rust like discarded antiques. They left their flak jackets stacked in the corner of their emotional tents when they went out on daily operations. Satan's fiery darts penetrated the unprotected soft tissue of their souls, and more lives and families were blown apart for failure to put on the flak jacket of practiced righteousness. Geronimo. Maybe an analogy will help. Think of the paratrooper. Airborne. Do you know how long it takes the Army to teach a soldier how to jump out of an airplane? 3 weeks. 3 weeks of training just to jump out of an airplane so gravity can take over. It's not as simple as it looks. Oh sure, gravity is gravity. You jump out of the door and there's a 100% chance you'll come down. The jumping and the descent are pretty much done deals. The critical point is landing. Falling 1,000 feet through the air can be traumatic enough, but the landing even more so. And when you experience a traumatic point of impact, you'd best be trained to react rightly, or you might just break both your legs, or worse. Jump school is essentially 3 weeks of learning and practicing new behavior patterns. It's multiple days spent mastering the parachute landing fall, or PLF. Hours and hours spent practicing for the moment of impact so it doesn't blow you apart. The goal is that under the pressure of a jump into combat, you won't even have to think about landing. You'll instinctively move toward the right way of doing it. It's all a matter of practiced behavior. Living by the word of righteousness has to do with time, custom, practice, and training. It is soldierly discipline, practiced constantly, so that at the moment of crisis, in that instant when the pressure's on, you'll know almost instinctively, almost habitually, what you must do. Having learned new patterns, the breastplate of righteousness, which guards your vitals, will hold up during the battle. You have so rehearsed the right thing to do that even under significant pressure, you'll just do it. Trained for victory. As a young officer in the war zone of Vietnam, I was not walking with Christ. The turmoil of the 60s had taken its toll on me to the place where intellectually I had left the faith. I was not sure God even existed. I tell you that to point out that my spiritual life was not healthy, to say the least. Even so, I managed not to succumb to the many of the temptations practiced by a number of my GI friends. At base camp, there were plenty of porn movies available for off-duty troops, and just a few miles away in town, all the sinful pleasures of the East waited for any GI with a few bucks. Now, why didn't I get sucked into the addiction like so many others did? It was certainly not due to a deeply vigorous spiritual life at the time. There was none. Nor was I immune to such temptation as a healthy young male, far from home. I firmly believe that my ability to resist such things was the fruit of years of practiced righteousness, learned under the tutelage of my father at home. I had no real strength in myself, but I did have training that managed to carry me. We Weber boys were trained so consistently over the years and at home in appropriate manly behavior that even without an active spiritual heart at the moment, the temptation did not penetrate. Even though I was spiritually disoriented for a lengthy season, the rehearsals of the years came through, and I didn't become a hapless victim of my own poor choices and appetites. Hard issues are at stake here. We are called to live a devout and holy life of moral rectitude, whether we feel like it or not. Such a pattern of righteous habits, lived out by the grace of God, and our diligent response to that grace, is worn like a breastplate, right over our vitals. This breastplate of practiced righteousness protects our vitals on the battlefield. So stand firm, soldier. Just as the belt of truth overcomes the devil's deceits, so the breastplate of righteousness overwhelms his temptations. Apart from such a life of devout moral purity and holiness, the believer is subject to the whims of the evil one. By considering ourselves dead to sin, we do not allow it to reign in our lives. We enjoy victory over the lust of the flesh and other tools of the evil one. A clean conscience is a magnificent factor in carrying the battle. By consistently keeping short accounts and confessing our fallings to the Lord as appropriate to others, we keep the breastplate polished. 1 John 3:21-22. Beloved, If our heart condemn us not, then we have confidence toward God. And whatsoever we ask, we receive of him, because we keep his commandments and do those things that are pleasing in his sight. Such moral power clearly occupies the high ground and carries the day. A polished breastplate gives the Christian a life of joy, fruitfulness, and eternal reward. Do right by your Savior, and nothing else matters.